Okay, good evening. We're continuing in the Torah portion as we keep going through the book of Exodus. This week's Torah portion is called Parshat Tetzaveh. And if you remember last week, we talked about the building of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the sanctuary for God that was going to be an imminent presence of God in the midst of the people. We talked last week about whether that was sort of a peeling back of the veil that separates or hides God from our perception. So there was a greater sense of God's presence in our midst, in the Mishkan, in this tabernacle that the Jewish people were instructed to build, or it was in our own hearts. There was a greater sense of connection and relationship to God that we had in our own hearts. So there's a conversation about that. We talked about that last week. We talked about the vessels that went into the Mishkan. We talked about the ark and how the tablets of stone, the Ten Commandments, were engraved on the originals, and the second tablets that Moses wrote out, that they were in there, and we talked about that. I was just want to mention one point that we didn't mention last week, is how the vessels were described, how to create those vessels before the actual building was built. So we learned much more about the vessels before we learned how to build the structure around it. And I was talking to somebody who had recently come back from Copenhagen, and they said that there's a museum in Copenhagen where the museum was built around a picture that was painted by Rembrandt. This beautiful picture of Rembrandt was the main focus of the building of this structure. The architects had in mind how to best bring out the magnificence of this painting. So the painting came before the building. In a way, that's there's the same kind of an idea, that the vessels that went inside the Mishkan were the purpose, and then everything else kind of went around that. The main focus, obviously in the museum in Copenhagen, was this painting, but for the Mishkan, it was the Aron, was the center, the Holy of Holies. That was the kind of the heart. That was where God spoke through the two cherubs, the two little angelic figures that are on top of the Aron. So I don't want to dwell on that. Now we're going to continue. Sometimes these two parshiot are read together. Last week's Parsha Truma, where we voluntarily gave of our things, like the stuff that we had. We gave gold and silver. We talked about that last week. And this week we're going to continue. So this week's Parshat Tetzaveh, I'll read the first sentence of this week's Torah portion. Now, you shall command the children of Israel that they shall take for you pure pressed olive oil for illumination, to kindle the lamp continually in the tent of meeting outside the partition that is near the testimonial tablets. Aaron and his sons shall arrange it from evening until morning before God, an eternal decree for their generations from the children of Israel. So now we're going to learn this commandment that God's commanding you. In this week's Torah portion, the whole Torah portion, there is no mention of the name of Moses. Moses' name does not appear in this week's Torah portion, and that's very significant. And a lot of the commentators talk about why that is. So again, we talked last week a little bit about how not all commentators think that the Torah was written in chronological order. So if you take the position that this Torah portion is written out of order, what is yet to come in next week's Torah portion is we have the sin of the Jewish people worshipping the golden calf. Moses goes up Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights to receive the word of God, to get all the Torah, that the people were too fearful to receive themselves directly from God. They said to Moses, you go up, get the Torah, bring it back, teach it to us. Moses goes up for 40 days and 40 nights. They miscalculate when Moses should come back, and they start to get very anxious. They go to Aaron, who's the Kohen, the priest, the high priest, and he intercedes, and they end up building this golden calf. We're going to talk about that next week. But it was a major sin. It's idolatry. It was really the wrong thing for the Jewish people to have done, and they have to atone for that. They have to ask for forgiveness, etc., etc. And Moses says to God, if you don't forget the Jewish people, I, Moses, am so one with the Jewish people. My soul and the Jewish people's soul are all interconnected. And I'm so one with the Jewish people that if you wipe out the Jewish people, wipe me out too. Take me out of the Torah. Take me out of the book that you're reading, that you're writing. If you're going to not forgive the Jewish people, if you're not going to allow them to continue and to accept their forgiveness and to accept their repentance, then take me out of your book that you're writing. The words we use, and there's a few places in this week's Torah portion, again and again and again, we have these themes that run through our Torah wisdom, and how we use our mouth and how we speak is a huge theme. And when Moses says this to God, he's creating a portion, so we don't hear about it, but we do hear you. God commands you 3 or 4 times, talking to Moses, but he doesn't use his name. So even though he's threaded through, and it is obvious from the text that God is talking to Moses, his name is not used. His name is taken out. We're going to talk a little bit about names, but I want to continue the theme of how our words impact the world, how our words create realities. So when Moses said, take my name out of your book, there has to be a hint to that. There has to be some reality that came from those words that came out of Moses' mouth. And that's why his name, one of the reasons given why his name is not in this Torah portion. Why this Torah portion? So in this Torah portion, we read about the menorah. I just told you about the oil. We're going to talk about the oil and the olives and pressing the olives to get out the oil to be used in the menorah. And then we go on to learn about the vestments, the clothing that the priests wear, that the tribe that comes from Aaron, who's Moses' older brother. Aaron becomes the priest, the high priest, who's going to do the service in the tabernacle and later on in the holy temple. And then we still have that tribe continues to be go down through the lineage of Aaron. We still have Kohanim today. We still have priests today who are descended from Aaron way back here, where he's given this job. This is the job that he gets. And the Kohanim today, the priests of today, link their lineage all the way back to Aaron. It's crazy. It's amazing. And this is his job to do the service in the temple. And so the words have to. So here's Aaron. This is his job. We're going to learn about the clothing that he wears. And we're going to learn about the inauguration and what he's going to do and the service that he's going to do and the sacrifice he's going to bring. We're going to learn all about that. And we're going to learn about the job that he has of lighting the menorah in the temple and so on and so on. And Moses, on some level, as we know, we say this over and over and over again, that Moses is the most humble of all men. Moses is somebody who's able to remove himself from an equation, to take his ego out. Moses, my job is to teach the Jewish people God's word, to emulate, to be godlike, to be the closest to God, almost to be sort of that bridge between God and the Jewish people. And so he has this amazing capacity to be incredibly humble, even though he has this most amazing job and he's the leader of the Jewish people and he's the teacher of the Jewish people. We call him Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher. But he is also well known to be the most humble of all men. So part of the humility expression is to minimize yourself. So again, if we're going to talk about the job of Aaron and what Aaron's going to do and how Aaron's going to be this priest, so Moses says, take me out. Like, I don't need my name to be used in this. I don't want to take away from what Aaron, the job of Aaron and the focus on Aaron. We're going to focus on Aaron right now. We're not going to focus on Moses anymore. So every single Torah portion from the birth of Moses until the end of the 5 books of Moses, right? All the way till we get to the end of Deuteronomy has Moses' name. Every single Torah reading has Moses' name except this one. And one of the other reasons given, other than the fact that his words have to have a reality, and he said, take me out, so he's out, but also to express and to give expression to the humility that Moses had. Take me out, also like remove me from the equation so we can focus on what I'm teaching now, which is the service that Aaron and all his sons have in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle. So that's another reason given why his name isn't mentioned in this week's Torah portion. But we do talk about names and how important a name is, even though in this Torah portion his name isn't mentioned. He is threaded through, like it is, you do this, you do that, inferring that it is Moses, but his name's not used. So just take a little second out here to talk about names. I think we've talked about it before, and many, many times the commentators talk about a name as being an expression of essence. That our essence is our soul, is our name. That our name on some level represents our essence. So the word in Hebrew for name is a shem. And the name for oil is, which we're going to learn about, which was the job of Aaron. Aaron's job was to take this pure oil that came from the olive. Obviously now they didn't have olive trees in the desert, so this was oil that they brought with them from Egypt. So they had the oil, but Moses had to look at it before it was used in the menorah. And then later on, when we settled in Shiloh, when the tabernacle entered Eretz Israel, into the land of Israel, and they had their tabernacle in Shiloh. And then when they moved down to Jerusalem and they built the holy temple in Jerusalem, then we had olive trees, and we could bring the olives, and we could squeeze the olives to get out the first drop of oil that came from the olive was what was used in the menorah. It was pure oil. It had pure olive oil. It had no detritus. It had no sort of dross bits and sediments and things in it. If it did, it wasn't used in the menorah. It was used for other purposes in the temple. But you have to squeeze the olive, and the first drop that came out was the drop that was used in the menorah. So there's a lot of talk about why it was that it had to be so pure, because the light that came from that oil, like oil, this olive oil that spreads out light, is the light that comes from the beginning of creation. It was a spiritual light. It was a holy light. It had to be pure. It had to have no ulterior motives. There had to be nothing, impure about it. It was the purest of oils. And the word for oil in Hebrew is shemen. So, the word shem is your name, and shemen is oil. And then our soul is our neshama. So these words are very interconnected. Oil and name, and neshama. And so even though we don't name a baby boy until the 8th day, or sometimes if there's a reason to delay the naming of having a brit milah, having a circumcision, we don't name a baby. So it doesn't mean that the child doesn't have an essence. But there is a thread of Jewish wisdom that says that our name is a representation of our essence. And so what's coming out is this inner light, this inner glow, this inner breath of God, some connection to the light that comes out. And we, the Jewish people, are considered the light unto the nations. I was just at a huge conference, 18,000 people, and there was a bunch of Christians there who really support the Jewish people and support the land of Israel. And their kind of rhetoric was, you Jewish people are the chosen people. You are the light unto the nations. And whether we actually live up to that role or not, that is a teaching that we are supposed to personify, that we have some kind of an ability to be that connector between the Torah that God puts into the world, the wisdom that God puts into the world, that we're supposed to embody that and personify that and live that, so that we can put that out into the world. And that's what it means to put light into the world. That Torah, the light that's bound up in the Torah. God says that I bind myself up with the Torah. And when you, the Jewish people, connect, or all people, when you connect to the mitzvot, when you connect to the ways in which you people, humanity, can connect to the Torah, that's how you're going to bring light into the world. And that's the mandate of us people, is to bring light into the world. So just like the menorah brings light into the world, we have to bring light into the world. It has to be a pure light, and it has to be a light that isn't defiled by self-interests or other things that are part of our humanity. But if we can have something to rise up to look at, say that's what I want to aspire to. It's a pure motive. I have to have a pure motive to my connection to God. Obviously, it's very hard to do that, but that's the goal. And when we do that, we bring light into the world, and that's the mission. So Aaron and his sons are the ones who are given this job of lighting the menorah, and the menorah therefore has to be lit with this pure oil. That's what we're talking about here, this pure oil that comes from, it says, bring near to yourself Aaron, your brother, and his sons with him from among the children of Israel. And it names his 4 sons, Aaron, Nadav, Avihu, Aaron is obviously the father, Nadav and Avihu, Elazar and Isamar. These are his 4 sons, the sons of Aaron, to minister to me. You shall make vestments of sanctity. I'm going to talk about the vestments in a minute. But the first job given to Aaron and his 4 sons was to light the menorah, to bring this oil, to take the first pure oil from the olive, to squeeze the olive to bring out that first drop. That first drop is so pure that that's what we're going to use. The rest is used for other purposes. The Jewish people are also likened unto this olive, that the squeezing of the olive brings out this oil, which is this amazing substance which can rise to the surface, which can bring that fire can emanate from, right? You put a wick into water, it doesn't burn. You put a wick into olive oil, it burns, right? So and it separates out from other substances. So there's a lot of likenesses of the Jewish people to olive and olive oil. But one of the things that is spoken about in the commentaries is obviously we all know how the Jewish people have been persecuted over the centuries. I don't have to go through all the different names of the ways in which they've been persecuted, the Inquisitions and the Holocaust and the pogroms, etc., etc. But the idea that suffering or some amount of squeezing, some amount of like pressure that brings something out, and that hopefully what comes out is something good, something pure, something that wouldn't come out if we weren't squeezed. So just like the olive, you can't have olive oil if you don't take the olive and squeeze it. And that on some level that's kind of one of the ideas of what it is that suffering does, or what it is that all of these persecutions over the generations has done to create the Jewish people and who we are, that we had to go through certain amounts of squeezing to bring out the purity and this light that is hidden inside the olive, that is hidden inside a person, comes out through being squeezed. It makes us. It like what doesn't, I guess what doesn't break you makes you. Hopefully we don't get squeezed so much that we get broken, but that we're able to be made by the things that come into our lives that squeeze us, so that we make ourselves better, we make ourselves more compassionate, we make ourselves more able to be effective people in the world, and kind people and compassionate people and good people, and connect to God more, and all of these things. Okay, so I thought it was really interesting. I read a commentary about why it is that Aaron's children are named. They named his 4 children here, Nadav, Avihu, Elazar, and Isamar. They're named. And Moses, we don't really, other than way back where we did learn about the names of Moses' children, they're not mentioned. He doesn't sort of hand on the mantle of leadership to his children. So Moses becomes the teacher of all the Jewish people, but we don't learn about his direct descendants, his children. But we do learn about Aaron's children. And I think it's an interesting kind of thing to think about, where you might think that this is like the height of Aaron's life. He's lived his life. He's been this incredible brother to Moses. Together they've brought the Jewish people out. And out of the land of Egypt. They brought them through the Red Sea. They brought them to the Mount Sinai. I mean, Moses and Aaron together have done this incredible job of leading the Jewish people, and Aaron has the pleasure or the enjoyment of having his children be the direct descendant who will continue the work that he started. So he's going to be the Kohen Gadol. He's going to be the one who is doing the service in the temple, and his children are going to take over and get that. They're named. On some level, maybe that is a highlight of Aaron's life. But yet we also know, or if I don't know, I'm spilling the beans of what is to come, that Nadav and Avihu mess up and they get killed on the inauguration of the tabernacle in not too distant future. That they die on the very day that the temple is, that the Mishkan is inaugurated, and we'll talk about how he responds, but that must be on some level that huge paradox between this incredible day of inauguration of the Mishkan that's been this kind of like building up, and here's my sons, and isn't it great, and life is wonderful, and then boom, his sons die. So like what do not that what's better, but on some level, maybe it's saying on some level, maybe be careful, parents. Don't live your life through your children. Don't be validated by the success or failures of your children. Maybe we can have a longer conversation about that. But the fall of Aaron's children, I imagine, is very traumatic. Unless there's this separation that we have, and we do our best and we put our best efforts in, we love our children, and we want to. We always want to be hovering over them and help them and bring them up, and etc., etc. But the choices they make and the lives they lead are theirs, and we can go along with them and be with them. But maybe there's a lesson here in not binding ourselves up with their successes or failures. Like my success of my children should, I don't know. I hope I'm getting across the point that Moses, we don't hear about his children. Aaron, we do hear about his children, but then not too distant future, his children die because of a sin that they did. And so, what's better or what's worth, or either way, we've got to put our stamp on the world. We've got to put some imprint in the world, like our little soul, our soul, our mission in life, our name, our neshama has something to give to the world. And maybe it's not always going to be how it manifests through how our children behave or what they do. Yes, we can be proud of them and have nachas from them, etc. But their success isn't. I don't know, something like that. That has something to do with, I think there's a good message there about how much we intertwine ourselves with the successes of our children. Like their success is their success. I can get pleasure in their success, but it's their success, or not. Moses, we don't hear about his children. Anyway, that was the point I wanted to bring over. One other point that I didn't make is about why Moses' name is not mentioned in this week's Torah portion. Is this week's Torah portion is always read, always read right before Purim. So next week, Tuesday, is Purim, and this week, before we get to Purim next week, there is the day that Moses dies on the 8th of the month of Adar. We're in the month of Adar, which was I think on Tuesday was the 8th of Adar, and that was the day that Moses dies. But it's also the day that Moses was born, and so that's an interesting thing. Like he came into the world on the 8th of Adar, and he died on the 8th of Adar. So it was like a complete. And just as a sidebar comment, we don't know where Moses is buried. God buries Moses. Like there's a sort of a secrecy, but there's also, from that we learn that when we want to be godlike, and we learn that God buries, who does God bury? God buries Moses. We don't know where he's buried, and God buries him. He died with a kiss, says, but we also learn to be godlike means that we have to bury the dead, and that's where we learn it from. And there's actually some references, I'm going to come back to them in a minute, but this idea of God burying Moses on the 8th of Adar is a lesson for us. Like we have to also bury our dead. And so as much as it's the day that Moses died and he's like removed from the world, but he's also born on that day. And if we go back to the idea that Moses is the teacher of Torah and Moses is intertwined, we talk about the 5 books of Moses. Every time we're learning Torah, we're learning the Torah that God put into the world through Moses. So there's a connection. We have this connection to Moses all the time. So even though he's died, he's ever present. He's always, in our teachings, in our learnings, in our Torah that we learn. So he's always, he's still here. So he's in all of us on some level. So even though Moses says, take me out of the book, he's not removed from the book. He's intertwined in the book. Okay, take his name out. But there's something even on some level even higher, right? We can have rules about how you live your life. Like you can have a household where you say, okay, you have to take your shoes off when you walk in, and you have to brush your teeth before you go to bed. And we have rules in our house. But if our children or the people who come into our house decide they don't want to take their shoes off and they don't want to brush their teeth, we don't divorce them. We don't decide we're not going to have a relationship with you. We continue to have a relationship with you. It would be better if you kept the rules, or we can work that out. And I think that's an interesting analogy. Like, okay, so there are so many people in the world, or so many Jewish people in the world, who are not connected to Torah, or not doing the Torah, or don't know about the Torah, or like whatever. But there's a relationship that we have with each other, and there's a relationship that you can have with God that is almost independent of the Torah, right? There's a soul connection that we have to the Jewish people, to each other, and then the Torah is another level of that. So I think it speaks to perhaps the reason why we have such a close connection to all Jews, why we feel like Jews are all one big family. We're all connected because we're all connected on the soul level, even if we don't all kind of tap in or plug into the Torah in the same way. So I think that's a really nice message. So even though we take Moses' name out of the Torah, out of this week's Torah portion, because he's like, take me out of the book. It's not really out of the book, but it doesn't matter because there's another connection that we have with each other, which is the soul level. So now I want to go into the idea of these garments. I want to talk about the garments because these garments are amazing. So there's a high priest, there's a Kohen Gadol, he's like the chief priest, and then there's the regular Kohanim, the regular priests, and they have different jobs. And the regular Kohanim wear 4 different kinds of garments, and the high priest has 8 garments, but he has the same 4 as all the regular priests. So the 4 garments that he wears are a tunic and breeches, like pants, and a belt and a turban, right? So those are the four garments that the regular priest wears, and they're white. And they represent an atonement for certain sins. So this is really interesting, and I don't know if this makes sense, but that the garment that your person wears. Okay, so this is a little different, but I want to harp on this idea that the garments that the priest wears, because the priest is the representative of the people in the Mishkan, and these garments that he wears are to atone for certain quote unquote sins, or the things that the people do wrong, right? So the breeches, the pants, are to atone for immorality, things that were done with the sexual organs that were not right, not correct, not the right way to behave. And so the breeches are atonement. By wearing these breeches, the priest is atoning for those sins of immorality. The belt, which separates the upper half of the body from the lower half of the body, you'll see a lot of Hasidim wear like a belt around their middle, separate the upper from the lower, are to atone for thoughts, that impure thoughts that come from your heart. The turban that they wear that they wore was to atone for arrogance, for having an arrogant or a haughty demeanor. That the sin of being an arrogant person would be atoned for by wearing the turban. And what's the last thing? The four things: the breeches, the belt, the turban, and the tunic. The tunic was to atone for murder. So I don't know all the mystical understandings of that, but that was the point. And I also want to point out that when we now, today, dress people for burial, as you maybe you know, I wash people for burial, and we take the body, we put them through a mikveh, which we're going to learn about in today's Torah portion, where Aaron and his sons and all the priests to come, before they can serve in the temple, they have to go into the mikveh. They have to kind of come out new, clean, like pure, so to speak, tahor. They can become spiritually pure, ritually pure, so they can go into the temple, do the service, and they wear these garments. And these four garments atone for these sins of immorality, of bad speech, of arrogance, of things we do wrong, and these garments atone for those. We do exactly the same before a person dies, and I really never really put this together, but I think it's such a huge thing to think about, that when a person dies and their soul leaves their body, now we have the body. What do we do with the body, right? These are sins of the body that we want to help the person. We dress them in these same garments. We put them in the pants and the tunic and the turban and the belt that goes around the middle, and at the same time we're dressing them, we have an attention to, and we say words that say, these breeches are to atone for. This belt is to atone for, and we speak it out on behalf of the person as we're dressing them. We have the intention. I've never shared this before because I've never really thought about it before. Even I say these words every time I do a washing of a person. We put them in a mikveh. We take a person after death into a mikveh before they're buried. So they're doing what the priests are doing, what we're reading about in this week's Torah portion. We're taking the body, it goes through the mikveh. Then we dress them in these we put them in 5 garments. We put them in these garments, and we say the words of, this will atone for this will atone for that, this will atone for immorality, this will atone for arrogance. It will, like things that we all do. We're all human, and we all went through this life, and we all try to work on ourselves, and we all try to be better, but at the end of the day we all have things that we have to atone for, and we're doing that, for the person in our care. And it's linked to what we're learning about now, what we're learning about with the Kohen, and what his job is and how he functions in the Mishkan. It's amazing. Okay, so there's the 4 big days. So the word for a garment is a beged. The word for a garment is a beged. Another Hebrew word, the Hebrew word, those letters of beged, also are the words that spell out the word to betray. To betray. They sort of, like, we say our skin is our skin, right? It's also our hide. The skin is also, in English, as a hide. Same idea, that our garments can betray what's behind, or they can express what's behind. So how do we use our garments? Do our garments reflect who we are on the inside? And we talked about this last week with the Holy Ark of the Covenant, that it had gold on the outside, it had gold on the inside, and they were like the same gold. So what was inside was the same as what was outside. And when you looked at not that we did, because it was in the Holy of Holies and we didn't actually look at it, but when the high priest went in on Yom Kippur and he saw the Holy Ark of the Covenant, the gold that was on the outside was the same as the gold on the inside. And we learnt last week about how the importance, or the idea of, are we on the outside the same as what we are on the inside? Is it the same? Are we authentic? Are we genuine? Are who we are on the outside a reflection of who we are on the inside? And we get it now. So at the very beginning of time when Adam and Eve were made. They did not have clothes. They did not wear clothes. They did not need clothes. They were in the Garden of Eden, and they had this huge soul, and they had a little wisp of a body. Their body was secondary to this huge soul that was who they were. When they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, everything changed. They were sent out of the garden. And what did God do? He clothed them. He dressed them. And now we are forever dressed, because he dressed them because they were embarrassed, because they did something wrong. And their soul went more into their bodies, and their bodies became more material, which is who we are. We're very material. Our bodies are very solid, and we think we're our bodies, and we look at people and we see their bodies. And we see the clothes that they choose to dress themselves in, and they hide. And what do we do on Purim? We hide. It's about hiding. Purim is a holiday of, maybe we should discuss this more, the kind of the value of, or the need to hide, or the health that we come from being more present, or being more authentic, or being more genuine, or sharing who we are and being accepted for who we are, and like really not feeling ashamed, and where the role of shame is in our life. And is that a good thing, or is it not a good thing? Does it motivate us? Does it not motivate us? But Adam and Eve were clothed by God. Again, that's where we learn the character trait of dressing the naked, right? So we have to clothe people. If people are like little children, they're naked, we have to clothe them. But if people don't have clothes, we should donate our clothes. We should help people be clothed. It's important to be clothed, because we need to clothe ourselves, because clothes are a make a man. Was that saying, clothes make a man? So Adam and Eve needed to be clothed. God clothed them. We learn how to clothe from that clothing. But what kind of clothing, and what does clothing do? And how do we use clothing? So oftentimes, many times through our Torah learning, even up until now, we have many examples of where clothing has been used to deceive, where it's been to hide, again, beged, to betray, to put forth something that isn't really the reality. If you go back to Esau, when he goes into Jacob, to his father Isaac, to get the blessing, when Jacob goes in to get the blessing, he pretends to be Esau. He puts on clothing that the blind Isaac will feel, and he'll think that Jacob is Esau, and he deceives him using clothing. We have Tamar, and we didn't really talk about the story of Tamar, but Tamar also dresses up as a prostitute to affect something that she's praised for having done. We're not going to go into that now. We have Joseph's coat, where Joseph is sold into slavery, and the brothers take the coat, the clothing of Joseph, and they dip it in blood, and they show it to the father to deceive him, and to get to the place where Jacob would then think that his beloved son Joseph is killed using clothing. We have Potiphar's wife, who takes the garment as Joseph does not succumb to her advances, and she's left with this baggage, left with this clothing that she shows to her husband. Look what this Joseph did, and he's thrown into jail. Clothing. The way in which clothing is used. Finally, the last one is Joseph. The idea of Joseph hiding behind his viceroy clothing when his brothers come down to Egypt to get food, and they don't recognize him. Why? Because many reasons, but one of the reasons is because he's wearing the Egyptian clothing. It betrays, it hides who he is, and so he reveals himself. What do we do on Purim? We're hiding. Where is God in the story? He's hiding. Where's Esther in the palace? She's hiding. And it's this idea of where we use hiding and we don't use hiding, and who we are and the importance of that. I mean, I don't have answers, because all these stories are different, and they all bring up different things to tease out, but the point is, where in our lives do we use clothing, or do we use a hiddenness? Like, there's very much a desire to hide. They say the highest form of tzedakah, the highest form of charity, not really charity, but justice, is giving somebody a livelihood, like giving them an ability to make their own money, to make their own way, right? But the highest way to do that is to not be known to be helping someone, right? So if you want to give somebody money, And as we do on Purim, we give people money. There are 4 things that we do on Purim Day, and one of them is to give money to the poor. But we don't do it. We give it to our rabbis, the discretionary fund, or we give it to somebody else to give to somebody. It doesn't come, like, people shouldn't know it comes from us. We'll hide. It's not about, look how great I am. Moses hides himself. He's not in this week's Torah portion. We don't read his name. He doesn't need to be named. Right? He has a job of putting Torah into the world. We have a job of redistributing our wealth, but we don't need to have our name on everything. Take yourself out. Do it in a discreet way. Do it where it's not like there's the highest form of charity is doing it without you being like lauded and given great honor because you gave money, right? You were given money so you could give it away. That's why you have it. But the idea of hiding and the idea of, right, so what do we do on Purim? We put masks on. Some people put masks on. Why? We hide. But we're right there. We're right in front of somebody. Like if you really want to hide, right, you go behind a tree and nobody can see you, right? But if you're this kind of hiding, this kind of game, this kind of who are we behind the veil? Every single religious Jewish wedding, the bride hides. She puts a veil on. What's that about? Why can't we look at the face of the bride? So one of the reasons given is because we're deceived by the externalities. The externalities don't always reflect what's going on the inside. The inside might be a very different reality, and hopefully you're not marrying the face of the person, well, maybe the face, but the body, whatever, like the external, right? That external is going to change. When you reach the 80, you're not going to look like you did when you were 20. You're marrying you're connecting to the soul, you're connecting to the inner, you're connecting to the essence, you're connecting to something other than the externality. So I never thought about this as being the veil, like we talk about, okay, you reveal the face to check that it's the correct bride, going back to Rachel and Leah. But what's the point of the veil? The veil perhaps has a message that says, be careful with the externalities. We're a religion, Shema Yisrael. We talk about hearing, right? But here we are about seeing. We're looking. We take everything in with our vision. It's like, okay, I can see the whole thing. I have a wonky eye, so I can't see everything. But most people hopefully can see everything. And when you see everything, you think you know everything, but you don't, because there's so much going on behind the scenes. There's so much we don't know. There's so much we can't see. And so maybe we shouldn't rely on our sense of sight, because sense can betray us, just like the beged, the garment. The root is a garment, is a clothing, but it's also a betrayal. It betrays who you are. So perhaps just like the Holy Covenant, it has the gold on the inside, gold on the outside. The idea is to be consonants, but to be the same. Sometimes we might need to hide. Sometimes we might need to put out something different. The Kohen Gadol, the Kohen, the priest, he wears these garments. These garments atone for certain sins of the people. And they're also, we have garments of gold. We have garments of blue. We have the Kohen Gadol wears 4 extra garments. He wears another robe. He wears a breastplate. He wears a gold headband that goes around that says holy to God on it. And there's a 4th, what am I missing? He has a mantle, he has an apron, a breastplate, a headplate, and the extra robe. So he has an apron, a mantle, a breastplate, and a headplate, which are extra. And those also atone for things that the people have will need atonement for. They atone for bad speech. So we talked before about speech and how when Moses said, blot me out of the Torah, if you don't forgive the Jewish people for the sin of the golden calf, then take me out of your book. So God sort of has to, because the words are so powerful, they have to manifest themselves somehow. So Moses' name is not mentioned in the Torah. But the other really amazing idea about this mantle that atones for lashon hara, for bad speech, for evil speech, for negative speech, is that this mantle, this gown thing, is made out of blue. It's a cheles. It's made from the same color. Sometimes it comes from a little snail that some people feel they found in Israel, and there are blue that's put into the tzitzit. But whether or not we have found it, it doesn't matter. It's a particular kind of blue that comes from this particular kind of snail. But the blue color reminds you to look down and to look at the sea. And when you look at the sea, it reflects back up to the sky, and you see the blue sky, and you look up, and it takes you to, we talked before about what this sort of heavenly throne, so to speak, even though God isn't a physical entity, obviously, but there's some heavenly throne that God sits on, and under the throne is this sapphire stone, is this blue. The point is that when the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, is wearing this blue tunic, and it's this color that takes you up from the sea to the sky, to the heavens, to the kisei, to the heavenly throne, to this blue sapphire stone. It takes you up, and it reminds you, there's more than this sort of situation you're in. There's a much bigger picture. There's a transcendent reality, and look up and be careful with your speech. This robe also has 2 hems around its top, apparently, like lips. So lips are sort of like, yes, I don't actually know what the role of lips are. I guess the role of lips are to not eat something too hot, or to kiss people, although we're not kissing anybody anymore nowadays with the coronavirus. But there's a guarding of the mouth. There's a guarding of the mouth that comes from the lips and the teeth and the tongue. Like, okay, so you might want to speak, but wait, shut your mouth. Zip it up. That's the hem of this male, that this robe, this blue robe that the Kohen Gadol wore, had these two hems up here. And also at the very bottom, really lovely, at the very bottom, there are little bells, little gold bells, interspersed with little cloth pomegranates. So the bottom hem of this mantle, of this robe that the Kohen Gadol, that the high priest wore, beautiful blue, this blue of the sea and the sky, at the bottom has a little bell, and it has a pomegranate, and a bell and a pomegranate, a bell and a pomegranate, all the way around. So for every bell which rings and makes a noise, there's a pomegranate which makes no noise. So maybe there's a message there for everything you want to say. There are 2 silences that go with every one thing you want to say. And that when the Kohen Gadol wore this garment, as he would walk, it would ring, it would make noise, so you would know when he's coming. So when he went into the Holy of Holies, or when he went into the Mishkan, he was like declaring his presence. And from this we learn, and from this I learnt, that before you go into a room, before you go into a space, knock on the door. The importance of knocking on the door. Don't walk into a room without knocking. Even your own house. Before you go into your house, you should knock on the door and declare your entry. Don't just walk in. And the fact is, I tell people sometimes when they come here for a meal on Shabbat, don't ring the doorbell, like just walk in. But really, you should knock on the door and walk in. That's the Jewish way, learnt out from the Kohen Gadol, who wears this tunic that has the bells on the bottom, so you always know when he's there. You can always hear him coming. You can always know that his presence is there. Like, have you ever been in a room where somebody just barges in and you go, wait a minute, I wasn't ready for you. Like, knock on the door, and then I can prepare, or if I needed to, or if I wasn't dressed appropriately, or whatever it is, that there's a certain honor that you give to a person before you just walk in. Even in your own home, you should knock on the door before you walk in. And we learn that from here. Okay, so this is the male. Then we have Aaron HaKohen, Aaron the high priest, and he wears this breastplate. It's called the breastplate of judgment, the Choshen Mishpat, and it says it's not on his chest. It says it's over his heart. So we go back to before, when God says to Moses, I'm choosing you, Moses, to be the one to lead the Jewish people out of Egypt. And Moses said, well, what about my older brother? If we remember the burning bush stories where Moses is arguing with God, he's like, no, maybe you don't really want me, and I can't talk properly, etc., etc. And when Moses succumbs and he does become the leader and he agrees to take the mission that God tells him that is his mission, Aaron is completely, fully, genuinely, open-heartedly happy for his brother. There's no trace of jealousy. There's no trace of, oh, that should have been my job, competitive. There's nothing. There's a pure, open, loving, accepting, uncompetitive, joyous heart of Aaron. It says, wonderful. And from that, because he was so open-hearted, because he was so supportive of his younger brother getting this amazing, job, he gets to wear this breastplate over his heart. And on the breastplate are precious stones. There's 12 precious stones, and on each stone is engraved the name of one of the tribes. Each stone has a tribe. Each stone has a different color, it's a different kind of stone, and each stone has one name of one of the tribes. So there's 12 tribes. This is crazy, how are the names put onto these stones? Through this little creature called a shamir. So a shamir is like a barley, it says barley-sized, like a little caterpillar or something, that was able to bore its way into the stone and write the names. This little shamir, this little worm, this little caterpillar, whatever it is, that was the size of a barley, was created right before the first Shabbat, on the eve, Friday, as the last day of creation, when Adam and Eve are created, that last day, right before Shabbat, but before it entered Shabbat, there were a few things that were created. One of them was this shamir, this little worm that's going to, one of the things it does is write the names onto these precious stones, the different colored precious stones. And it names each one of the tribes. There's 12 tribes, and inside the Choshen Mishpat, inside this breastplate, over the heart. Again, over the heart. And I just wanted a sidebar comment that Moses, another reason why Moses' name is taken out is because he's so happy for his brother. He doesn't want to take away from his brother, right? His brother's now being inaugurated as the Kohen, as the priest, and he's going to teach him what to do, and you're going to light the menorah, and you're going to do this, and you're going to bring the sacrifices, and you're going to do all this stuff, and it's your job. It's not my job, and I'm happy for you, and I'm going to teach it to you, and I'm going to give it to you. Because the first week Moses did it. Moses kind of learned how to do it, and then he handed it off without any negativity on his part, with a full and open heart. So we have these two brothers, Aaron and Moses, who are fully and open-heartedly supportive and encouraging and promoting the work and the job of each other. And so both of them have this open-heartedness. But Aaron starts by his ability to be joyous and open-hearted when Moses gets the initial leadership job. And for that, he gets rewarded with having this breastplate that goes over his heart with the names of all the tribes on this breastplate. So the breastplate has it's like folded onto itself, and there's a space in between. What's in between is a piece of paper, I think. I don't know what it's made of. Maybe it's parchment, but something onto which is written the name of God. And there's a conversation in the different commentaries whether it was the 36th letter name of God or the 72 lettered name of God. But the name of God is in there. And it became a way in which, if there was a question as to what to do with the Jewish people, if there was a question, a big question, not an individual question, but a big question that had to be asked, it was a way to ask God, ask the Kohen Gadol, who would sort of that he would have what's the word I'm looking for? Ruach HaKodesh. He would have the Spirit of God would come to him. And what would happen is that there would be this question that would be asked of the Urim V'Turim, which was this name of God that was inside the breastplate. So inside the breastplate is the name of God, and this question would be asked. And what would happen is that the stones, the letters on the stones that was made by this little shamir, different letters would light up. There would be a lighting up of specific letters in response to the question, which is where this word Urim, because Urim, the root of the word Urim is light. So they lit up. There was a lighting up of certain letters on the breastplate, and then there was V'Tumim. There was an interpretation of the letters that would then give the answer to the question. And that tumim, that ability to interpret the message that was coming through the lighting up of certain letters, was something that was hard, and it was God-given, like the ability to be able to interpret correctly. So there's a story, and perhaps we all know this story, but I'm going to tell it anyway because it's a great story. We all have to know it. It's important to know. Hannah, we all know the story of Hannah. And Hannah was desperate. She was suffering from infertility. She wanted to have a child. She didn't have a child. The tabernacle is now resting in Shiloh. It had entered into the land of Israel. The high priest is Eli. and he sees this woman in the tabernacle praying, and the lights on the Urim V'Turim lit up, on the breastplate lit up, in such a way that he interpreted that she was drunk. And he says, "What are you doing here? You're drunk." And she says, "No, I'm praying for a child." And from her we learn how to pray, because she prayed with words, and she prayed out loud, and quietly but out loud, and with her lips moving. And we learn. I don't want to go into that, but the point is that he misinterpreted. He did not correctly interpret the lighting up of the letters, because the same letters, when they're put in a certain order, can mean that she was drunk, can also mean that she's a holy and dignified woman. And Eli, the high priest, misinterpreted the letters, that they really meant that she was a holy and dignified woman, but he interpreted them as she was drunk. Just an example, but it's something that is brought down now into our day, where we can look into the Torah and we can see so much light in the Torah. The Urim is accessible. We can go there and we can find amazing wisdom, what we need help with, most of us need help with, I need help with, most of us need help with, is the correct interpretation. How to take the Urim, the light of the Torah, and bring it to the wholesomeness, and bring it so that is really what God wants of us. The tumim, the completeness, the wholesomeness of the message is linked to God. It's not so. That's where we have to sometimes be careful how we interpret the Torah. So we've got the light of the Torah, but we have a lot of different interpretations of the Torah, and that's where I want to leave it. But back then, in the days of the Mishkan, where in the days of the tabernacle in the desert, we had Aaron, who was able to correctly interpret the lighting up of these, so that there were certain things that the Jewish people could get a communication from God. Right? If we remember, they couldn't deal with the communication that came at Mount Sinai. It was too much. But here's a way of asking a question, having these letters light up, and then having a correct interpretation of what those letters mean. And it's like a Morse code, okay, here's what you do, and it came directly from God. It was like amazing. Anyway, so that's crazy. And if we think about that this is in our tradition, this is in our Torah. We read about this Urim V'Turim that was inside the Choshen Mishpat, that was on the breast, on the heart of Aaron, the high priest. Okay, so one of the things that is written about these garments, that the garments that the Kohen Gadol had to wear, that the priests wore, is that they were worn. I see if I can find it, but you shall make vestments of sanctity for Aaron, your brother. So God is saying you, again, doesn't use Moses' word, but he says you, because it's implied that he's saying you, Moses, make garments of sanctity for Aaron, your brother, for glory and for splendor. These two words, tiferet and kavod, for glory and splendor. And so from here we have an idea that's termed hidur mitzvah, how we beautify a mitzvah, how we beautify something. Judaica, beautiful mezuzahs that go on our doorposts, beautiful kiddush cups that we have, beautiful menorahs that we have, beautiful Judaica that is not just plain wood or plain this. Like we invest in the aesthetics of our ritual objects, and there's a reason for that, because it somehow sanctifies them, it elevates them, it gives them greater importance. The vestments of the Kohen Gadol, there's something. It's not for his own. It's not for his honor. It's for the honor of God that he's wearing these vestments. He's not doing it for his own arrogance. For me, look at me, I'm so, And I was just in England recently. You go to synagogue and the chazan, he's standing on the bima and he has this fancy hat on and he's like this robe and he sits in this box. That's a special box for the rabbi, the special box for the people on the board. They call them the honorary officers. But, and they wear top hats and so on. There's a certain vestments, a certain clothing that you wear, but be careful. Again, it's not to make you arrogant. It's because you represent God. When you go into a synagogue and it's beautiful, and there's beautiful stained glass windows, and there's beautiful tapestries, and there's beautiful art. Again, like it kind of lifts you up. There's a certain aesthetic. There's something beautiful in the aesthetic that can elevate us. And I read something really lovely about appreciating, about what it means to appreciate something, the beauty and the excellence of something we can really appreciate that. So here's a quote. I'm not sure where I got it, but what it means to appreciate something. It's the ability to find, recognize, and take pleasure in the existence of goodness in the physical and social worlds. Okay, so the ability to find, recognize, and take pleasure in the existence of goodness in the physical and social worlds. Going on to suggest that there are three categories of things that we appreciate. We appreciate physical beauty. We appreciate the beautiful menorahs or the beautiful vestments of the Kohen, of the high priest, or the beautiful tapestries that adorn the ark in our synagogues, or the beautiful. You go into Sfat, or you go into the artist colony anywhere in Israel, and you see this beautiful, Judaicas, the beautiful honey pots that we put our honey in, or the beautiful Passover trays, or the etc., like the way in which we beautify our religious objects with physically, so they're beautiful to behold. And we also appreciate somebody's talent, somebody's skill. So here's the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and we appreciate his physical presentation, his clothing, and this beautiful gold band, and the beautiful blue mantle, and this breastplate with all the stones of the names of the Jewish people, and the bells, and it's beautiful imagery. And there's an appreciation of that. There's appreciation from the skills that he had to do to bring the sacrifices onto the altars, and the work that he did. He was skilled in that, and also his moral goodness. That, as we spoke about, one of the things that Aaron is known for is his open-heartedness, and his ability to seek peace, to really want to pursue peace above all. Like the many stories of Aaron being somebody who loved peace and pursued peace, that he had that character trait that we want to emulate, that we see in him a virtue, we see in him a moral goodness that we appreciate and we want. So it leads us to a greater sense of well-being and life satisfaction and purpose and hope. When we have these role models, when we're impacted, they impact our spiritual experience. They make us more empathetic and sympathetic and concerned for others. So the beauty of the Kohen Gadol, let's just talk about the Kohen Gadol, and it can be then manifest in other places. But the Kohen Gadol represented somebody who all the Jewish people appreciated, using this word appreciated, the beauty, the physical beauty, his skills, his talent, and his moral and virtuous goodness. That they had all three of those things, and in the appreciation of that, and in the desire to be like that, that we the regular people could have a greater sense of well-being and life satisfaction and purpose and hope. And so there's a certain theology of beauty, not that we worship the person or we worship the externalities of what a person looks like or what Aaron the high priest looked like, but there's something in the beauty, the beautiful experience that can elevate us, and so not to get waylaid by saying, okay, well, the physical is what I'm worshiping or what I'm emulating. No, the physical sort of brings you in and then allows you to kind of like see beyond that. And what is it that's beyond that? So the last thing I want to say is that the Kohen, the regular Kohen, wearing these white garments, he had 4 white garments, and the 4 white garments were the turban, the tunic, the breeches, and the belt. And the Kohen Gadol had those 4 garments, and then he had the 4 that went on top. So he had the apron and the breastplate and this headband, and then the tunic. He had those, and they were very colorful, and there was gold, and there was a lot of like externalities to that. So what you have is the gold on the outside, right? That's what we saw. If you looked at the Kohen Gadol, you would see this blue and the gold, and you would see all that. But know that what's next to the skin of this human Aaron, our high priest, what's next to the skin is white and is linen and is simple, right? It's real. It represents the splendor, the tiferet. These 2 words that I just read to you, tiferet and kavod, 2 different. So the kavod, the honor, the sort of more like the regal, the kingship, the high priestness, the awe that you have for the gold that you see, the fear and the respect of them, almost like a kingship kind of an idea. That's the outside clothing. And the inside clothing is next to the skin, and it's mercy and love and tiferet and splendor, and it's compassion, and it's love centered. So the two juxtaposed, and what's on the outside brings you in, but to know what's on the inside is love and compassion and kindness, and the God's name that represents the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, God is, was, and will be always. That's what's on the inside. But we needed, the Kohen Gadol needed to have that expression of the gold and the magnificence and the splendor on the outside. One last point: the menorah and the shed this light, and the windows in the holy temple were narrow, but then they expanded out. There was, I don't know if you've seen windows like that, but where there's a little opening, but then it expands out. So the light had a greater impact. It was like shed out, right? Instead of the other way around, where there's like a big window and only a little bit of like a bottleneck. It goes the other way, so that the light got shed out, but it went out. It went out like that. So. I've said a lot and I'm going over time, but I think that's the point. And I want to just go back to wrap it all up and talk about the service that Aaron did in the temple, that Aaron did in the Mishkan. And at the very end of this Torah portion, we read about the continual offering of the lamb that was brought in the morning and it was brought in the evening. It was brought in the morning, it was brought in the evening. Every day, that evening, there was a lighting of the menorah, that there were 7 candles that were lit, 7 lights that were lit, and every morning you had to get rid of the ashes and light them and light it again. But there was one light that continuously continued. The 7th light continued all the way till the next evening. So there's an aspect of continuity. There's an aspect of faithfulness. There's an aspect of don't just use religion. Don't just do religion on one day or one time or on Shabbos. It pervades our whole existence. It's all around us. There's light all around us. There's a veil that God brings down, so we can't see it unless we look for it. We hide ourselves. People hide themselves. How much they want exposed, how much they don't want exposed. How we're all yearning for connection. We're all hardwired for connection, says Brene Brown. And we all want to shed light. We all want to be like Aaron and Moses, who can not have any competition and not have any impediments to their desire to be a light to the nations and to encourage other people to shed their light, and that my light doesn't impinge on your light, and that we're all in this together, and we're all kind of working on putting a little bit of light and expanding it out. And so as we enter into the month we continue into the month of Adar, and we come into Purim, and we come into a desire for unity amongst the Jewish people, and we help each other. We give food to each other. We give presents to each other. We give presents of food to each other. We give money to each other. We feed each other. There's a great community of giving that goes on the day of Purim. Purim is likened unto, maybe we should have a class on Purim. So maybe next week I'll teach. I'm not going to teach on Tuesday because it's Purim next week, but maybe in advance of that I'll teach a class on Purim, and we can have some Purim ideas before we go into the holiday of Purim. So my blessing to all of us is that we continue to kind of maybe understand ourselves, to know ourselves, to love ourselves, to be able to shed that out so the small can expand out, and that the clothing that we wear is clothing that represents who we are, that we're the things that we want to hide, we're able to hide, and the things that we want to expose, we're able to expose, and that we can search for God and find God. And we can find God in each other, and we can find God. Actually, no, when you say Shalom Aleichem to someone, it's a plural. Why are you saying Shalom Aleichem to one person? That doesn't make sense that you would say Shalom Aleichem to one person. It's a plural word, because you're saying Shalom Aleichem. I'm saying Shalom to you, the person. I'm also saying you, the godly soul, because you are also a godly soul. And our godly soul is who we are. It's hidden by the garment of the body, hidden by our begadim, our clothes that we put on ourselves. So should continue to shine our lights, continue to expose ourselves, continue to hide what we want to hide, continue to find the right balance for each one of us.